The Learjet 35 business jet slices through the thin air at 43,000 feet, its sleek fuselage gleaming in the afternoon sun as it cruises westward across the vast expanse of Texas. Inside the cockpit, the captain and first officer sit motionless in their seats, heads tilted forward at unnatural angles, hands resting limply on their laps. They are not resting. They are not checking charts. They are unconscious, their brains slowly dying from oxygen starvation. Behind them in the small passenger cabin, 4 passengers are similarly incapacitated. Business executives who boarded this charter flight in Houston just 40 minutes ago, expecting a quick trip to Dallas, now slumped in their leather seats, unaware that they are slowly suffocating in the thin air of high altitude. The aircraft flies on, autopilot maintaining course and altitude with computer precision. The engines hum steadily. Every system functions normally. But there is no one conscious to monitor the flight, no one able to respond to the emergency unfolding silently around them. The Learjet has become a flying tomb, carrying 6 people who cannot help themselves, heading toward the moment when fuel exhaustion will end this ghost flight in the most final way possible. Air traffic controllers have been trying to make contact for 15 minutes. Dozens of radio calls on multiple frequencies produce only silence. Fighter jets are being scrambled, racing to intercept this unresponsive aircraft before it crosses into restricted airspace or poses a threat to populated areas. And when those fighters finally reach the Learjet and position alongside to peer through the windows, what they report will confirm everyone's worst fears. Nobody is moving. The cockpit appears empty. Through the cabin windows, they can see motionless figures. The Learjet is flying itself, and everyone aboard is beyond help. Before I reveal what caused everyone aboard this flight to lose consciousness and how this tragedy ended, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is one of the most disturbing examples of how hypoxia can kill an entire aircraft full of people before anyone realizes what is happening. I am Captain Paul Henderson. In 25 years of commercial aviation, I have encountered numerous emergencies and system failures. But hypoxia, the gradual oxygen starvation that occurs when pressurization fails at high altitude, is perhaps the most terrifying threat we face, because it does not announce itself dramatically. There are no explosions, no violent decompression, no obvious crisis. Just a slow, insidious degradation of mental function that convinces you everything is fine, even as your brain shuts down from lack of oxygen. This is the story of Learjet Flight 231, and how a pressurization failure at cruise altitude killed everyone aboard before the crew even recognized there was a problem. This is about the deadly gap between when hypoxia begins and when pilots notice something is wrong, about the critical importance of immediate action when pressurization warnings activate, and about how modern aviation learned tragic lessons about the time of useful consciousness at high altitude. Welcome aboard. March 19, 2008, a Wednesday afternoon, William P. Hobby Airport in Houston, Texas. The spring sun shines brightly over the sprawling Gulf Coast metropolis, temperatures climbing into the comfortable mid-70s. At the General Aviation Terminal, a Learjet 35A business jet is being prepared for a charter flight to Dallas Love Field. The aircraft is registration November 231 Lima Romeo, a 20-year-old business jet operated by a charter company specializing in corporate travel. Despite its age, the Learjet is well maintained with a clean maintenance record. The most recent inspection was completed just 2 weeks earlier, with no significant issues noted. Mechanically, this aircraft is in good condition and fully airworthy. The passengers for this flight are 4 business executives from an oil and gas company headquartered in Houston. They have an important meeting in Dallas this afternoon and have chartered the Learjet to avoid the hassle of commercial airline travel. They arrive at the General Aviation Terminal in a company car, briefcases in hand, already reviewing documents for their upcoming presentation. The crew consists of 2 pilots. Captain James Rodriguez occupies the left seat. He is 49 years old with over 8,000 hours of flight time, including approximately 3,000 hours in Learjet aircraft. He is experienced, professional, well regarded by colleagues and clients. His training records show consistently satisfactory performance. He is exactly the kind of pilot charter companies want flying their aircraft. First Officer Sarah Mitchell sits in the right seat. She is 32 years old, with approximately 2,000 hours total time and 500 hours in the Learjet 35. She is less experienced than Captain Rodriguez, but fully qualified and competent. She has been flying charters for 3 years and has never had an incident or accident. Both pilots are well rested, having had adequate time off between flights, meeting all rest requirements. The flight plan is straightforward. Houston to Dallas, a distance of approximately 240 miles. Flight time estimated at 45 minutes. They will climb to 43,000 feet for the short cruise portion, then descend into Dallas. The weather along the route is excellent, with clear skies and light winds. Nothing about this flight suggests any complications. At 2:14 in the afternoon Central Time, the Learjet pushes back from its parking position. Captain Rodriguez starts both Garrett turbofan engines. They spool up smoothly, all parameters showing normal. The passengers are settled in the cabin, seatbelts fastened, ready for departure. The flight attendant, this charter, does not carry one, so the passengers are on their own once airborne, reviews safety information briefly with them. Ground control clears them to taxi to runway 12 right. Rodriguez taxis smoothly, following the yellow centerline markings toward the departure end. Tower clears them for takeoff at 2:21. Rodriguez advances the thrust levers to maximum power. The Learjet, light and powerful with only 4 passengers and minimal fuel load, accelerates rapidly down the runway. At rotation speed, Rodriguez pulls back on the yoke. The nose lifts sharply. The main gear leaves the pavement. The Learjet climbs steeply into the Texas afternoon, its rate of climb exceeding 4,000 feet per minute. This is what business jets do best. Rapid climbs to high altitude where the air is smooth and fuel efficiency is optimal. The departure is flawless. They follow their assigned departure procedure, turning northwest toward Dallas. Houston Departure Control provides altitude clearances as they climb. Learjet 231 Lima Romeo, climb and maintain flight level 280. Climb and maintain 280 Learjet 231 Lima Romeo. First Officer Mitchell responds clearly, her voice professional and calm. They continue climbing, passing through 20,000 feet, then 30,000, then 40,000. The Learjet climbs quickly through the thinner air, its engines performing beautifully. Inside the cabin, passengers feel their ears pop as the pressurization system adjusts, maintaining a comfortable cabin altitude of approximately 8,000 feet, even as the aircraft climbs toward 43,000 feet actual altitude. At 2:33, Houston Center clears them to their final cruising altitude. Learjet 231 Lima Romeo, climb and maintain flight level 430. Climb to 430 231 Lima Romeo. Mitchell's acknowledgement is the last transmission anyone will hear from the flight. The Learjet climbs through 41,000 feet, then 42,000, then levels off at 43,000 feet. The autopilot captures the altitude smoothly. The auto-throttle adjusts engine power to maintain cruise speed. Everything appears normal. The aircraft is flying perfectly. But something is wrong. Something that will not become apparent for several more minutes, but something that is already beginning to affect everyone aboard. The pressurization system has failed. The exact nature of the failure will be debated by investigators later, but the result is clear. The cabin is no longer being pressurized properly. At 43,000 feet, the outside atmospheric pressure is only about 2.5 pounds per square inch, compared to 14.7 at sea level. The air is so thin that a person breathing it will lose consciousness within 15 to 20 seconds. The pressurization system is designed to maintain cabin altitude at approximately 8,000 feet, providing a safe, comfortable environment with adequate oxygen. But when that system fails, the cabin altitude rises rapidly to match the aircraft altitude. Within 2 or 3 minutes of leveling off at 43,000 feet, the cabin altitude has also reached 43,000 feet. The air inside the Learjet is now as thin and deadly as the air outside. The crew should have warning systems alerting them to this problem. The Learjet 35 is equipped with a cabin altitude warning that activates when cabin altitude exceeds 10,000 feet. This warning should have sounded, providing clear notice that pressurization has been lost and immediate action is required. But here is where the insidious nature of hypoxia becomes critical. The warning may have sounded. The lights may have illuminated. But if the crew was already beginning to experience hypoxia, if their judgment was already being impaired by oxygen deprivation, they may not have processed the warning correctly. They may have heard it, but not understood its significance. They may have looked at it, but not recognized the danger. Hypoxia affects the brain before you realize something is wrong. Your judgment fails before your awareness. You may feel fine, even euphoric, while your brain is actually dying from lack of oxygen. This is why hypoxia is so dangerous. It robs you of the ability to recognize that you need help. At 2:36, just 3 minutes after leveling off at cruise altitude, Houston Center attempts to hand the flight off to Fort Worth Center. Learjet 231 Lima Romeo. Contact Fort Worth Center now on frequency 127.0. No response. The controller waits a reasonable time, perhaps 20 seconds, then tries again. Learjet 231 Lima Romeo, Houston Center. Contact Fort Worth on 127.0. Still nothing. The Learjet continues flying, visible on radar, maintaining perfect course and altitude, but not responding to radio calls. The controller tries a third time. No response. He switches to the emergency frequency. Learjet 231 Lima Romeo, Houston Center on guard. How do you read? Silence. Just the soft hiss of static. The controller notifies his supervisor. They discuss the situation. An aircraft that stops responding to radio calls is always concerning, but this is particularly worrying because the silence came so suddenly. 1 minute the crew was communicating normally. The next minute, they are completely unresponsive. Controllers implement standard procedures. They ask other aircraft in the area to attempt contact on air-to-air frequencies. Multiple pilots try. Learjet 231 Lima Romeo. This is Southwest 472. Do you read? No response. Learjet 231 Gulfstream 89er Alpha calling on 121.5. Nothing. They attempt to send data link messages through the aircraft's communication systems. The messages are transmitted but go unacknowledged. The Learjet continues flying northwest, exactly on its filed flight plan route, exactly at its assigned altitude, but utterly silent. If you are as disturbed by this as I am, go ahead and hit that like button right now, and make sure you stay subscribed, because what happens over the next hour is a heartbreaking example of how helpless we are when hypoxia incapacitates everyone aboard an aircraft. Share this video because understanding the deadly speed of hypoxia is critical for everyone in aviation. At 2:42, just 9 minutes after the last radio contact, the North American Aerospace Defense Command is notified. 2 F-16 fighters are scrambled from Ellington Field Joint Reserve Base, not far from Houston. They climb rapidly, racing to intercept the Learjet before it can travel too far from populated areas or enter restricted airspace. Inside the Learjet, everyone is unconscious or very close to it. Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Mitchell sit motionless in the cockpit, their brains starved of oxygen, unable to respond to the radio calls they cannot hear or process. In the cabin, the 4 passengers are similarly incapacitated, slumped in their seats, briefcases forgotten on the floor beside them. The Learjet flies on, following its programmed route with perfect precision. The autopilot maintains altitude and heading. The engines run smoothly. The aircraft performs exactly as designed. But there is no one conscious to monitor the flight, no one able to recognize that anything is wrong, no one who can save themselves or their fellow passengers. At 2:58, the fighter jets reach the Learjet. The lead pilot, call sign Viper 11, positions his F-16 alongside the business jet, perhaps 75 feet away, close enough to see clearly through the windows. He reports what he sees to the ground controllers monitoring the situation. Viper 11 has visual contact with the Learjet. The cockpit appears empty. I do not see anyone in the pilot seats. Moving aft to check the cabin windows. He maneuvers his fighter to look through the small cabin windows on the side of the Learjet. I can see figures in the passenger seats. They are not moving. No one is looking out the windows. No response to my presence. The aircraft appears to be flying on autopilot, with everyone aboard incapacitated. This information is relayed immediately to NORAD Command, to the Federal Aviation Administration, to the charter company operating the flight. The worst fears are confirmed. This is a ghost flight, an aircraft flying itself with everyone aboard unconscious or dead. The fighters continue escorting the Learjet as it flies northwest. Controllers on the ground are calculating fuel consumption, trying to determine how long the aircraft can continue flying. The Learjet departed Houston with enough fuel for the short flight to Dallas plus normal reserves, but it has now been airborne for over 40 minutes and shows no signs of descending or deviating from its course. At 3:12, the Learjet passes over Dallas without descending. without turning toward the airport, without any indication that anyone aboard recognizes they have reached their destination. The aircraft continues northwest into rural Texas, heading toward increasingly sparsely populated areas. The fighter pilots continue to report periodically on what they observe. No movement in the cockpit, no signs of consciousness in the cabin. The aircraft flying perfectly straight and level, as if operated by a skilled pilot, but with no one visibly at the controls. At 3:28, approximately 1 hour and 7 minutes after the last radio contact, the Learjet's fuel situation becomes critical. The fighter pilots report seeing one engine begin to spool down, the telltale sign of fuel starvation. Moments later, the right engine flames out completely, its turbine blades slowing to a stop as the last fuel is consumed. The Learjet continues flying on one engine for approximately 3 more minutes. The autopilot compensates for the loss of thrust on one side, adding rudder and aileron to maintain straight flight. But the single remaining engine is also running on fumes. At 3:31, the left engine also flames out. Both engines are now silent. The Learjet has become a glider, beginning its final descent toward the earth below. Without engine power, the autopilot disconnects automatically. The aircraft begins descending in a gradually tightening spiral, losing altitude at an increasing rate. The fighter pilots follow the Learjet down, watching helplessly as it descends toward the Texas countryside below. They report its position constantly, guiding emergency services toward the inevitable impact point. At 3:34 in the afternoon, the Learjet impacts open rangeland approximately 80 miles northwest of Dallas, near the small town of Palo Pinto. The aircraft is in a steep nose-down attitude. When it strikes the ground at high speed, the impact is catastrophic, instantly fatal for everyone aboard. The Learjet disintegrates on contact with the rocky ground. The fuselage breaks into dozens of pieces. The wings separate and cartwheel across the terrain. Wreckage scatters over an area of several hundred yards. There is little fuel remaining to burn, so fire is minimal, just small flames from residual fuel in lines and components. All 6 people aboard die on impact: Captain James Rodriguez, First Officer Sarah Mitchell, and the 4 business executives who had no idea their routine charter flight would end this way. They had almost certainly been dead for over an hour before the crash, victims of hypoxia long before the aircraft ran out of fuel. Emergency responders reached the crash site within 45 minutes, guided by the fighter pilots circling overhead and by local ranchers who witnessed the impact. But there is nothing they can do except secure the scene and begin the process of recovery. There are no survivors, no injured to treat, no hope of rescue. The investigation that follows is led by the National Transportation Safety Board, with assistance from Learjet, the engine manufacturers, and numerous aviation safety experts. Investigators face the challenging task of determining exactly what caused the pressurization failure and why the crew did not respond to it. The wreckage is carefully collected and transported to a facility where it can be examined in detail. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are recovered and analyzed. These devices provide critical information about what happened during the flight. The flight data recorder shows that the aircraft climbed normally to 43,000 feet and leveled off. It shows that cabin altitude, which should have remained at approximately 8,000 feet, instead rose rapidly after leveling off, reaching over 40,000 feet within minutes. This confirms that pressurization was lost at or shortly after reaching cruise altitude. The cockpit voice recorder captures normal conversation between the pilots during climb. They discuss the flight plan, communicate with air traffic control, run through checklists. Everything sounds routine and professional. But then, approximately 2 to 3 minutes after leveling off at cruise altitude, their speech begins to change. It becomes slightly slurred, slower, less coherent. This is consistent with the early effects of hypoxia. One of the pilots, investigators cannot determine which one from the audio quality, says something that sounds like feeling weird or something's weird. But there is no follow-up discussion, no troubleshooting, no emergency actions taken. Within another 30 seconds, speech becomes unintelligible, just garbled sounds. And then, approximately 4 minutes after leveling off, there are no more voices, just mechanical sounds, engines, air conditioning, and what might be warning tones in the background. The investigation focuses intensely on the pressurization system. Investigators recover components from the wreckage and examine them in laboratories. What they discover is both illuminating and tragic. The Learjet 35's pressurization system uses bleed air from the engines to pressurize the cabin. The system includes multiple valves, controllers, and safety devices designed to maintain proper cabin pressure. One critical component is the outflow valve, which releases excess air to prevent overpressurization while maintaining the desired cabin altitude. The investigation determines that the outflow valve was found in a position consistent with being fully open or stuck open. With the outflow valve fully open, pressurized air would flow out of the cabin as fast as the system could pump it in. The pressurization system would be unable to maintain cabin pressure. As the aircraft climbed to high altitude, the cabin altitude would rise to match the outside altitude. But why was the outflow valve fully open or stuck open? The investigation cannot determine this definitively. The valve was damaged in the crash, making it impossible to determine whether it failed mechanically, whether it was manually positioned incorrectly, or whether some other malfunction caused it to open when it should have remained closed. What is clear is that the valve position resulted in complete loss of cabin pressurization and that the crew did not recognize or respond to this emergency before hypoxia incapacitated them. The investigation also examines why the crew did not don oxygen masks and descend when the pressurization problem developed. The Learjet is equipped with quick-donning oxygen masks for the pilots, stored within easy reach and designed to be deployed and donned within 5 seconds. The proper response to a pressurization failure is immediate. Masks on first, then declare emergency and begin immediate descent to 10,000 feet or below. But the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder show that the crew never deployed their oxygen masks, never declared an emergency, never initiated a descent. They were incapacitated by hypoxia before they could take these life-saving actions. This reveals the critical, deadly problem with hypoxia at high altitude. At 43,000 feet, the time of useful consciousness after sudden loss of pressurization is approximately 9 to 12 seconds. That is the amount of time you have from the moment you lose oxygen until you lose the ability to perform complex tasks like donning a mask or flying an aircraft. 9 to 12 seconds. That is barely enough time to recognize something is wrong, let alone take effective action. If you hesitate even briefly, if you spend a few seconds trying to understand what is happening, you will be unconscious before you can save yourself. The investigation determines the probable cause of the accident to be the flight crew's incapacitation due to hypoxia resulting from a loss of cabin pressurization. The pressurization loss was caused by a malfunction of the outflow valve, though the specific reason for the malfunction could not be determined. Contributing factors include the rapid onset of hypoxia at high altitude, which left insufficient time for the crew to recognize the problem and respond before losing consciousness. The National Transportation Safety Board makes several safety recommendations based on their findings. Aircraft manufacturers should develop and install enhanced pressurization warning systems that are more difficult to ignore or misinterpret, with warnings that activate earlier and are more persistent. The warnings should include both audio and visual alerts on primary flight displays. Pilot training should place greater emphasis on the dangers of hypoxia and the critical importance of immediate action when pressurization warnings activate. Pilots should be trained that at high altitude, there is no time to troubleshoot or analyze. Oxygen mask goes on first immediately, before any other action. Then you can troubleshoot while descending. All pilots who fly at high altitudes should undergo hypoxia training in altitude chambers, experiencing mild oxygen deprivation under controlled conditions, so they learn to recognize the symptoms in themselves. This training can provide valuable awareness of how quickly hypoxia affects judgment and physical ability. Aircraft operating above 40,000 feet should be required to have automatic emergency descent systems that can detect loss of pressurization and initiate an immediate descent without pilot input. Some modern aircraft now incorporate such systems. For the families of those who died aboard Learjet Flight 231, the investigation findings provide some measure of understanding, but little comfort. Their loved ones did not suffer. Hypoxia at high altitude is painless, even somewhat pleasant in its final stages. There is euphoria, a sense of well-being, then unconsciousness. No panic, no struggle, no pain. They simply went to sleep and never woke up, but they died in a preventable accident, killed by a mechanical failure that should have been survivable if recognized and addressed within the critical first few seconds. The crew had warning systems alerting them to the pressurization problem. They had oxygen masks within arm's reach. They had the knowledge and training to respond correctly. But hypoxia robbed them of the ability to use any of these resources before it was too late. For me, as a pilot who regularly flies at high altitudes, this accident reinforces lessons that I work hard to internalize and never forget. First, pressurization failure at high altitude is an immediate, life-threatening emergency requiring instant action. There is no time to think, no time to analyze, no time to troubleshoot. Mask on first, period. Then emergency descent. Then you can figure out what went wrong. Second, the time of useful consciousness at high altitude is shockingly brief. At 40,000 feet, you have perhaps 10 to 15 seconds from the moment you lose oxygen until you lose consciousness. That is barely enough time to reach for your mask and pull it over your face. There is no margin for error, no second chances. Third, hypoxia training is not optional for pilots who fly high. Every pilot operating above 25,000 feet should experience hypoxia in an altitude chamber so they know what it feels like: the euphoria, the tingling in fingers, the tunnel vision, the impaired judgment. If you have experienced these symptoms in a controlled environment, you have a slightly better chance of recognizing them quickly if they occur during flight. Fourth, never assume that a warning is false just because you cannot immediately identify the problem. If your pressurization warning activates, treat it as real until proven otherwise. Mask on, descend, then troubleshoot. Do not continue at altitude while trying to figure out whether the warning is valid. The ghost flight of Learjet 231 remains a sobering reminder of how quickly hypoxia can incapacitate an entire aircraft. 6 people died, including 2 experienced pilots, in an accident that was survivable if they had responded within the first few seconds after pressurization was lost. But hypoxia robbed them of those critical seconds, stealing their consciousness before they could save themselves. This tragedy led to enhanced pressurization warning systems and improved hypoxia training that have saved lives in the years since. If this story taught you something about aviation safety you did not know before, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more real aviation investigations. Give this video a like to help spread awareness about the deadly speed of hypoxia at high altitude, and share it with anyone interested in aviation, because understanding how quickly incapacitation can occur is critical for everyone who flies above 25,000 feet. Your engagement helps me continue bringing you these essential safety stories from the cockpit. I am Captain Paul Henderson. Thank you for staying with me through this tragic story. Remember that at high altitude, seconds count. Pressurization failure requires instant action. Oxygen mask on immediately, then emergency descent. Do not analyze, do not troubleshoot, do not hesitate, just get the mask on. Your life depends on those first few seconds. Fly safe, undergo hypoxia training if you fly high, and always be prepared to react instantly when pressurization warnings activate. Until next time, this is Captain Paul Henderson, signing off.